Are you tired of the same coffee, the same blends every month? Yeah, well, me too. So I've partnered with Triangle Coffee Company. Triangle Coffee Company is a coffee company based solely on aliens and all things spooky. Their Alien Zach has come out with some amazing new flavors. Personally, my favorite right now is Ghost in the Machine, which is a pumpkin spice blend because I'm a basic white girl. They also have flavors like The Land Beyond the Wall, Area 51, and Dolce, which are all amazing. If you would like to try Triangle Coffee Company, you can go to trianglecoffeecompany.com and enter the discount code MAMA10 at checkout for 10% off of your order today. Happy Wednesday! You're listening to Mama Murdered a Podcast. I'm your host, AB. This week on Mama Murdered a Podcast, we'll be covering part 2 of Chris Watts, Family Annihilator and Trash Human. If you haven't already, I would highly suggest that you back it up, go find part 1, listen to it first. If not, you're likely going to be confused. And before I say let's get it, I want to shout out my mother-in-law. Happy birthday, you beautiful soul. I love you, Marie. This will be a real test to see if she listens. Ha ha ha. So, since we're all here for one thing and one thing only, let's get it. So last week, we kind of ran through how Shanann and Chris met, how they kind of accumulated this lifestyle that they honestly could not afford, how they managed to get pregnant, and kind of just a baseline for the kind of life that they led, the kind of work that they did. And this week, we'll get into a little bit more of it. This may be a 3-parter because I found a lot of stuff that I have personally thought about, but things that I had no idea that other people were also thinking. And I think it would be interesting to go through some of that along with some of the ghostly things that I found while researching this related to this case. So we'll see. So let's begin part 2. In August of 2016, Chris and Shanann enrolled their oldest daughter, Bella, who was only 2 at the time, into a private, preschool daycare kind of thing. And it was a very prestigious and extremely expensive preschool in their area. This was something else that the couple simply could not afford. But Shanann used this opportunity to meet people to sign up under her for her Thrive business. Even Bella's preschool director, Amanda Thayer, would eventually sign up with Shanann. It may have took her about 9 months to finally jump on the Thrive train, but Shanann would stand outside and tell her all the amazing things that Thrive could help with, and she would do this while she was picking Bella up every day from daycare. Shanann used the times that Bella was at daycare from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. to kind of go full force with her Thrive business. And at this point, Shanann was actually thinking about quitting her job at the children's hospital and, quote-unquote, thriving full-time. I think the way that Shanann looked at this was kind of like, hey, you can buy Thrive from me and you can live this perfect life too. Like instead of selling the product, she was trying to sell more like the idea that Thrive was this cure-all, be-all supplement that could give you a life just as perfect as hers. The perfect house, the perfect husband, the perfect kids, and the perfect marriage. And it had worked for her, surely it would work for you. But she was making more money selling Thrive than most decent jobs pay. Chris had gotten his car bonus by this time working through Thrive also. Well, kinda. Shanann got him his car bonus, and Chris later says that Shanann told him that no one could ever find out that she was the one selling Thrive under both his account and her own. So I'm not sure if it was like a company rule or what. But it sounds to me like Chris doesn't like a lot of the things that go on in their marriage, but he also doesn't have the guts to say so. And we mentioned a few life insurance policies in part 1, and it seems like Chris would be looking at a pretty good payout if everybody in his house went missing. Well, of course, except for himself. And right around this time, Bella and Cece both seem to be super sick all of the time. So much so that even this quiet, stays-to-himself Chris had mentioned the girls' constant sickness to his coworkers. Shanann used the girls being sick as an opportunity to rave about how much Thrive helped her stay healthy, strong, and energetic for the girls when they were sick. Blocked tear duct surgeries, viruses, pneumonia, you name it, the girls had it. Which is also always given me Munchausen syndrome by proxy vibes. And apparently I'm not the only one that thought that this may be what the case was in this situation, which is something that I think would be interesting to get into once we finish this case. Munchausen syndrome is basically where you create illnesses for yourself, oftentimes to gain sympathy, money, etc. from people. And Munchausen syndrome by proxy is basically where a parent, usually the mother, creates or causes illnesses in her own children for a lot of the same reasons: sympathy, money, etc. Shanann started going live on her Facebook and Instagram account, which grew her online presence faster and more effectively than just posting pictures and videos than it ever had before. And she started going live a lot in September of 2016. Shanann's old theater teacher, Matt, was even able to reconnect with Shanann via her Facebook, and he always supported Shanann as much as he could by sharing her posts, trying to help his way back when student as much as he could. He was extremely proud to see how far Shanann had actually come since he taught her in drama classes in high school. There were a lot of times that Shanann recorded Chris doing something pretty normal, like super normal dad things with his girls, and she would take pictures of him doing these random things or videos to post on her social media accounts. One day, Shanann posted a video of Chris that she had taken without him knowing that he was being recorded. And Chris was standing in the kitchen singing the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse hot dog, hot diggity dog song. If you have kids, you know the song. I'm not singing it. And since Chris wasn't aware that he was being filmed, he even did a little weird dance at the end of him singing to the girls. And when Shanann posted this video, she captioned it, "Best Daddy Ever." And then she used the hashtag, "He's going to kill me," in reference to her posting this video of him being silly without his knowledge. And we can all agree that hashtag didn't age well? Yeah? Okay. And since she had been promoted so many times so quickly, she and Chris would be able to go on quite a few vacations to convention centers and etc., all expenses paid by the Thrive Company. So, you really can't turn down a free vacation. During their first all expenses paid Thrive vacation, they went to New Orleans on a trip. They went to fancy masquerade ball themed dinners. This trip would be the first time that Shanann would get to meet a lot of the people that she'd connected with online via Thrive. And she had her and her Thrive friends posted in every picture that she thought would help sell the product, and Chris secretly hated every single minute of it. Which, I kind of get this. My husband hates taking pictures, but he also doesn't secretly bottle it up. He bluntly gripes and complains every single time I try to take a cute picture. But that just wasn't the case with Chris. And Shanann was constantly posting and uploading every minute and every detail of her and Chris's life together, which I could kind of understand how this would get annoying and why. He has 2 small kids. He works a full-time job. He supports his wife, thriving to an extreme that I don't think I could handle. And most days, as soon as he walks in the front door from work, she's already on a live video with her phone and the camera right in his face. But she also kind of had to be on her phone and her computer all the time in order to make money. But when are you supposed to have time for each other? Like, every bit of alone time that this couple got was being recorded and uploaded, or at least documented in some way, to her social media accounts. And I'm sure it wouldn't take long for this to get real old real fast. And even though the majority of their life was online, Shanann always made sure to let the whole world know how much she appreciated Chris. She would go on and on and on in these long gratitude posts about how grateful she was for everything that he did for their family, and how she couldn't ask for a better man for her and the girls. She raved about what a good dad he was and how attentive he'd always been with her and the girls' health, and it seemed like Shanann and Chris were extremely close for the most part of their marriage. And it was in the first week in December when Cece ate 2 cashews and had a massive allergic reaction to them. She threw up quite a few times and broke out in hives, and I can only imagine that this had to be terrifying as a parent. Luckily, I've never had a kid with an allergic reaction. I don't think I could handle it mentally. But their daughter Cece was extremely allergic to nuts, and this is when Chris and Shanann first found out. And somewhere around this same time is when Chris's dad, Ronnie, would also sign up to sell Thrive under Shanann. And soon after, Chris and Shanann got to take another all-expenses-paid vacation via Thrive, and for this trip, Chris's parents flew in from North Carolina to Colorado to take care of the girls while the couple was gone. Shanann thanked her in-laws via a post on her social media accounts for looking after the girls while she and Chris were gone on this trip. And she also said that she loved them and that she thanked them for being like an extra set of parents to her as well. So it seems like some of the in-law tension was fading. For now anyways. Shanann's mom and dad, Sandra and Frank, were still living in the Watts basement when Chris's parents came to babysit the girls while Chris and Shanann were on this second trip. And Chris's parents must have just agreed to watch them because, maybe they just wanted to spend time with the girls, which makes sense. But if Frank and Sandra are already living there, it would kind of make sense that they would babysit the girls while the couple was gone. Unless, like I said, Cindy and Ronnie just, offered to come down to be able to spend time with the girls. But Shanann's mom, Sandra, recalled feeling like she wasn't allowed to even be around the girls while Chris's parents were babysitting them. Like they didn't want her or Frank anywhere near the girls. She felt like her and her husband were not allowed to be around the girls. And finally, Sandra confronted Cindy on what the deal was. And with this confrontation, the entire thing got turned into a screaming match between Chris's mom, Cindy, and Shanann's mom, Sandra. And it was only a few short weeks after this screaming match that Shanann's mom, Sandra, and her dad, Frank, packed up and moved back to Aberdeen, North Carolina. But according to Shanann's mom, Sandra, the screaming match wasn't the reason for their move back to North Carolina. They were actually moving back because Shanann's brother, Frankie, wasn't doing so well as far as finances go. Shanann's brother, Frankie, had been the one that had been taking care of their parents' house while the couple was living with Chris and Shanann. And by the first month or so of 2017, Chris had started working out, toning up, and losing weight. There are a ton of videos and footage of Chris doing workouts with the Thrive patch on his arm. And it wasn't long before he was completely beefed up, which is basically the complete opposite of what he had been when him and Shanann first met. He was a little overweight, a lot of awkward, and just not a very sociable person. So he was thriving it up also. And by April of 2017, Shanann had officially decided to finally go full-time with her Thrive business and quit her job at the Children's Hospital. She, of course, took this opportunity to post on her social media accounts a picture of her work ID badge saying that she had quit and that now that she would have more time to thrive. She had been making a pretty good income with Thrive, so much so that it would be her only job now. And from what I could find, just from her Thrive business alone, she was bringing home anywhere from $65,000 to $70,000 a year. And later on in her Thrive sales, she would sometimes bring in as much as $100,000 a year. Chris even later says that most of the time, Shanann made just as much money as he did working in the oil field. Shanann had over 200 people signed up under her, and she was pretty good at convincing people that Thrive was something that they needed in their life. And on May 16, 2017, Chris turned 32 and Shanann had to spoil him yet again. She had gotten him Metallica concert tickets and a matching tour shirt, which she of course posted about on her social media because it's Shanann. And Metallica was one of Chris's absolute favorite bands, as we'll see later. And this is one of the only videos that I could find that Chris looks genuinely happy in. He honestly looks like he's stoked without seeming like he's just playing the good husband role in order to support his wife. He kissed her and you could see actual, genuine emotion in this video. Chris did later admit that he hated being in the spotlight of Shanann's social media frenzy and that he never said anything to Shanann about it. Basically because she called the shots on pretty much everything in their house. But not voicing your likes and dislikes is extremely detrimental to a marriage, no matter how stable it may or may not be. And on June 5th, Cece was enrolled in the same private preschool, daycare, whatever it was that Bella went to. And it would cost Chris and Shanann about $25,000 a year just for both kids to attend this preschool. And if they knew they couldn't afford that, why not put them in a regular run-of-the-mill daycare? Like, why put yourself in a debt that you don't absolutely have to have? Especially when you know you can't afford these private, upscale preschool prices. And my guess would be that they needed to keep up appearances. This seemed to be something important to them. They cared what people thought about them. And Shanann made it sound like she would be able to get so much more done with both the girls in school, which I'm sure that she would, but with a really expensive daycare, it's a work-from-home type of job for a reason. Figure it out. And none of this is to say that, she got what was coming to her. But as we'll see later, it's just neither one of these people were in the right. No, Shanann, of course, did not deserve what Chris did to her. But, a lot of this stuff could have been avoided regardless. Chris and Shanann went to the Metallica concert in Denver not long after they finally had gotten both girls enrolled in daycare. And this is another one of the only videos I could find where Chris looks genuinely happy and excited. Shanann posted pictures of him with his fist in the air singing along, and you can kind of feel his excitement just by watching the video. And when Thrive came out with the duo patches, Chris got really serious about his workout routine and running, and he even turned their basement into an at-home gym. He lost another 20 pounds, and people that knew him actually said that during this time, Chris had gone from dad bod to just flat out hot. And I'm here for the dad bods in all of their glory. And Chris attributed his weight loss and beefed up body to literally just Thrive products and working out and eating better. He said those were the only things that he could associate with his weight loss. Shanann got to go on a third all-expenses-paid trip through Thrive on June 22nd, and Chris was going to stay home with the girls while she went on this trip. So the month after she got back from this trip, they would celebrate Cece's second birthday, and around this time is when both Bella and Cece were also diagnosed with asthma. And this is also about the same time that Anadarko Oil Company, where Chris worked, got a new employee in the health and safety department named Nicole Kessinger, who I'm just going to refer to as Kessinger from here on out because Shanann also has a really good friend named Nicole who plays a big part in this case. We could also refer to Kessinger as the great value version of Shanann Watts because I really don't like this woman and I think she has more to do with these murders than she or Chris will ever admit to, but who am I? Co-workers later said that when Kessinger would walk by to get her lunch out of the fridge or to grab something that Chris would look up from his laptop and kind of follow her with his eyes in an awkward way, but he never actually spoke a word to her or about her to anyone. And even when Chris's co-workers would talk about Kessinger and the way she looked, her outfit, or her body, Chris never chimed in or took part in these conversations with any of his male co-workers at work. Kessinger said that for a while that she and Chris hadn't even spoken as much as one word to each other. They just worked for the same company, and that was that. But Kessinger's internet search history determined that that was a lie. Police records showed that Kessinger first Googled Chris Watts around 11 p.m. on August 3rd, 2017. And it would be about 1 month later when Kessinger's search history showed the first time that she Googled Shanann Watts. And she didn't just Google Shanann Watts. She actually spelled her name right, with the most of the time unused and forgotten hyphen. A few of the guys that worked with Chris said that they got so tired of seeing Shanann pop up on their Facebook feed 6 or 7 times a day, where she would either post on her own account or Chris's account trying to rein in Thrive sales, that some of their friends and his coworkers actually blocked Shanann. That it got so bad that, they would turn the notifications off and somehow she would be tagging other people that would still make their phones go off. Which I just took that to mean that they weren't interested in Thrive and probably just got tired of seeing the notifications. Not that they didn't like her or that, they had a problem with her, just that gets annoying and it happens to all of us with somebody that we know. But one thing that nobody could say is that Shanann wasn't working and thriving her little ass off online because she was doing it. She had used her social media to make money, which is the dream. Shanann had surgery in mid-August to fix some kind of disc in her neck or back area that was supposed to help stop Shanann's headaches and migraines. And one of Shanann's close friends, Christina, flew in to help take care of Shanann and the girls after her surgery. Because, Chris he still had to work. And this wasn't the first time that Christina had met Chris. It was just the first time that the two would spend any long length of time together. Christina would stay at the Watts house for 2 months to help get Shanann back to 100%. And she was another friend that thought that their dominatrix and submissive relationship just worked for them, even if it wouldn't work for a lot of other people. And just hours after her surgery from the hospital bed, Shanann was still putting together trial packs to send to people that might want to try Thrive but were hesitant to. She had also earned the money for her flight to their next vacation from her hospital bed. She literally never stopped. She was passionate about these products, and it showed. While Christina was still staying with the Watts, she and Shanann drove about 800 miles to Vegas for a yearly Thrive celebration and training. Chris stayed back from this trip, and he kept Bella and Cece, and he also kept Christina's daughter, who was around the same age as his girls, from what I could find. And while they were in Vegas, Shanann was still healing, and she was still having to wear this neck brace to help her neck finish healing, correctly. And people at the Thrive convention said that when they asked Shanann why she was wearing this neck brace, that she told them that she had been bitten by a shark in Australia. Which I feel like this is a response that says a lot about Shanann as a person, and it just makes me laugh. When Shanann and Christina got back from their trip, Christina and her daughter flew back to their home in Hawaii, and Chris and Shanann would get to take yet another trip for the Thrive Company not long after Christina and Shanann had got back from the Vegas Thrive trip. Chris's parents would fly out to Colorado to keep the girls while the couple went on this next trip, and everything during this trip was pretty uneventful. Every year for Christmas, Chris would dress up like Santa and bring the girls presents and gifts, and in one video where Chris is dressed as Santa, he comes inside to surprise the girls. And you can hear and see the frustration in Shanann's voice when she asked him a few times where his phone is and that she needed it for pictures since she was recording a video for it on her phone. She then looks right into the camera and says, "I gotta go get the phone. This is hard as one parent. I want to get the phone so I can get pictures. Hold please, my husband's a genius." And he doesn't listen. And this is one of the only videos that I could find where they didn't actually put off and portray this perfect couple scenario. You can see the frustration in Shanann's voice, and you can hear how unenthusiastic Chris sounds. And both Bella and Cece were mortified by this strange man in their house wearing a red and white Santa suit. After Bella and Cece get their water bottles and their Poppy slippers, Poppy the troll cartoon movie, Chris goes to walk out of the house, and he turns around and tells the girls that he hopes they enjoy their gifts and that he'll see them next year. And neither one of these girls would make it to see Santa the next year, thanks to their own dad/Santa. In 2017, Shanann sold $720,699 worth of Thrive products, and her New Year's resolution was to double the number of sales for the year of 2018. And it would soon be time for yet another all-expenses-paid trip for Chris and Shanann. Chris and Shanann soon flew to Vegas for their 5th all-expenses-paid Thrive trip. And this time it would be Shanann's mom, Sandra, that came to Colorado to keep the girls, but her dad stayed back in North Carolina this time. The couple were steady digging themselves into another credit card debt, and they even had a civil case against them for not paying their HOA. Which, at the same time, they're also getting letters from the mortgage company and the banks where they're behind on their mortgage payments as well. The couple borrowed $10,000 against Chris's 401k, which was the maximum amount that they could borrow. And not long after this, both girls ended up having to have tubes in their ears and have their adenoids taken out at the same time. Which is something that I was thinking about earlier. Even with really good insurance, fertility treatments were likely not covered by insurance to help Shanann get pregnant, and between her own lupus and all the medical bills for the girls and their health, this is probably a large part of their debt. Of course, there's still the expensive furnitures, daycares, vehicles, etc. Things that they just couldn't afford, which I guess the car doesn't count, because she got that payment covered through Thrive. But either way, they're spending outrageous amounts of money on things that they don't absolutely need, and they don't have it to spend. But even with the couple going right back down the rabbit hole of debt, Shanann started telling friends and family in spring of 2018 that they were trying for baby number 3. Chris had the bright idea that maybe if Shanann would get pregnant again, that this time that couple would hopefully have a boy, and it would complete their little family. And they started trying immediately. But since it had taken help of fertility treatments to conceive both Bella and Cece, they didn't really give it much more thought than that. Even with tracking her menstrual cycles and shooting for the prime time of conception, that was basically their only plan. But only after a few weeks of trying, Shanann would have to put these plans on hold also, because she had a 6-week trip with her and the girls, and she had planned to go to Charlotte, North Carolina to visit with friends and family. She and the girls were planning on staying the entire summer of 2018 in North Carolina. And Chris would only be able to go the last week of the visit to North Carolina because he had to work. And according to Chris, this was about the same time that Bella and Cece would start using Shanann's own words to critique him, just like they'd seen their mom do. In a People magazine interview with the Watts neighbor, Melinda Phillips, she told the magazine that one morning she was loading up the car to head out for work. And when she got outside, that Chris and Shanann were in a screaming match. And from what she said, it was a pretty intense argument. She said that once they noticed her noticing them, that they immediately went back into a very calm talking voice and hugging each other. She said it, honest to God, looked like they started an acting skit once they noticed that she had saw them fighting. She said that it was literal seconds that they went from fighting and screaming to calmly talking and hugging. So obviously their life wasn't as perfect as they tried to portray it on Facebook and Insta, which it never really is. Shanann started recording a video to post later on Facebook from her kitchen on May 29, 2018. She was waiting for Chris to come in from work to surprise him with a shirt that she had been wearing that said, "Oops, we did it again." Gotta love a Britney Spears reference. And this was her way of letting Chris know that she was pregnant again with their third baby. And in this video, he tries really, really hard to sound excited, but with his monotone voice and the way he says, "I guess when you want to, it happens," it's just not very convincing. Chris then picks up the pregnancy test and asks if the pink lines on the pregnancy test mean that they're going to have another girl. Like, I'm sorry, sir, have you not had 2 kids previously? Do you not understand that that just means there's a jelly bean of a baby in there? It doesn't actually determine the sex. You can just see it all over his face. He is not thrilled. But this is a pretty intimate thing to put him on the spot about for a Facebook video. For starters, he didn't know that she was recording the minute he walked through the door, and he was just getting in from work, probably still carrying his entire workday around with him still, but the recording was a pretty regular thing in the Watts house, so, this may have been something that he was just used to. Shanann wouldn't actually post the video online until June 11th, though. She was super excited, and Chris was telling people at work, his coworker said that he seemed to be pretty excited about baby number 3, too. Even though Chris would later admit in an interview that he was scared to have another baby. Coworker said that everyone in the office was congratulating Chris on baby number 3 and that he seemed over the moon about it. But there was another coworker of Chris's that said a few days after Shanann had told him she was pregnant, Chris asked this coworker if he, quote, wanted a baby, which is a joke that I make pretty frequently, even to strangers at the grocery store. They say how cute my boys are, and I say, "Hey, they're driving me crazy. Do you want 2 kids?" We laugh, and we go our separate ways. But this coworker did say that Chris said it kind of jokingly, so it could have been the same thing. But this coworker and his wife had already had a few miscarriages recently, so I don't know if that was a good joke. And it seemed like Chris was saying like, "Hey, you've had some miscarriages with your wife. We're going to have an extra kid." I don't know. It's just weird, especially since Chris isn't the loud, joking type to start with. June 1st would be the first time that newest Anadarko employee Nicole Kessinger and Chris would end up speaking to each other. A computer app that controlled the gas monitor sensors was acting up, and Chris had to go to the office and find Kessinger to get her to fix the app. And soon enough, Chris would be in a full-blown, whirlwind, Lifetime movie-style romantic affair with Nicole Kessinger. She would be his younger, childless mistress. She would be the Great Value brand of his wife, Shanann. And I don't know why calling her that cracks me up as much as it does, but I'm a trash human, so here we are. For those of you not in the United States, Great Value is the Walmart brand of all the good stuff at half the price of the good stuff. Hence, the Great Value version of Shanann Watts. Kessinger says that Chris wasn't wearing a wedding band and that they just talked about the problems with the app. And Chris later says that she's right, he wasn't wearing a wedding band because he had lost so much weight with Thrive products, eating cleaner, and working out that his wedding ring just started slipping right off his finger at random, so he stopped wearing it. But let's all remember that Kessinger's internet search history showed that she had Googled Shanann Watts' name for the first time about a year before their supposed affair started. So even if he wasn't wearing his wedding ring, she would have known that he was married for sure from when she Googled Shanann and Chris, especially when she Facebook stalked the two. A few days later, Kessinger sent a mass email out to quite a few of the field workers to make sure that the app wasn't still giving them problems. Chris emailed her back and told her that it seemed to be working fine since she had fixed it, and he thanked her for her help and told her to have a great rest of her day. And sometime around Father's Day, after Chris and Kessinger were already talking to each other and in the midst of their affair, Chris showed off pictures of his daughters Cece and Bella to Kessinger. Chris also told Kessinger that he was married, but that he and Shanann were getting a separation, that things were amicable between the two, and that they only lived together for financial reasons, that they were planning to sell their house, they would get 2 separate apartments, and go their own way. Which is fine if that was the truth, but it's not. And later that day, Kessinger emailed Chris again and thanked him for being honest about being married. He emails back about an hour later and tells her that lying only makes things harder and that he thinks she looks absolutely stunning. So, he tells her that he can't wait to get to know her better, and Kessinger tells him that she wants to find someone to build a family and a life with, but out of respect for herself and Shanann, they should keep their relationship strictly work-related. So, what does it matter if he was being honest about being married? I don't get it. Either way, Chris says that he agrees, but then tells Kessinger that anything that they talk about together could stay between them. So not exactly keeping things work-related. And then Chris sends Kessinger his work number because he says that sometimes their work email gets wonky. So this is the last email exchange that he would have with this Anadarko employee, Nicole Kessinger. Also weird that this is literally the only day that they emailed each other ever. So, right after this, Shanann, Chris, and the girls celebrate Father's Day. And of course, Shanann makes this long, loving gratitude post directed at Chris, where she thanks him for being such an amazing husband, dad, and friend, and then says how lucky she is that she and the girls have him in their life. Shanann also records their daughter Bella singing a song that she had been practicing and had memorized about how much she loved her daddy. And I'm going to play it here because I cannot do it justice.
My daddy is a hero. He helps me grow up strong. He helped me snuggle too. He reads me books. He ties my shoes. If you're a hero, blue and blue, my daddy, I love you.
And if that did not break you, you have no soul. The lyrics go, my daddy is my hero. He helps me grow up strong. He helps me snuggle too. He reads me books. He ties my shoes. You're my hero through and through. Daddy, daddy, I love you. And that video literally ruins me into 1,000 pieces every single time I hear it. It just shows the simplicity and the innocence of a 4-year-old singing to her daddy just because she loves him that much. And later, when Shanann tells Bella and Cece that they're going to be big sisters, Bella squeals. And she just says, I want to give the baby a hug. And Shanann posted this naturally adorable picture of Bella and Cece as an announcement picture that she was pregnant again. She had Bella dressed like a tiny teacher standing in front of a whiteboard that said, Big Sister 101. And Cece was sitting in a smaller chair being the student, and it was adorable. Shanann went to her first ultrasound alone without Chris on June 19th. She found out that her due date was going to be January 31st of 2019. Chris wasn't able to go to this ultrasound because there was a tornado in the fields where he worked, and I still don't understand why you just wouldn't take the day off to go with her like a normal husband, to be able to be there for the ultrasound and find out when your baby will be here, but that's just me, and I don't kill people. The couple would later find out that they were in fact having the boy that Chris had been dreaming about. The couple decided that they would name him Nico Lee Watts, and Nico is real close to being short for Nicole, as in Nicole Kessinger, his mistress. But Chris is asked about this coincidence later during an interview, and he denies that it had anything to do with his mistress. Even though I highly doubt that he would admit to it even if it were true, because he still very much cares how people perceive him, even after he's already murdered his pregnant wife, unborn son, and both of their daughters. Regardless, he stands by the fact that Shanann picked the name Nico and that he picked the name Lee since it was his own middle name. A few days later, on June 22nd, Chris and Shanann would get to head out to San Diego for yet another Thrive trip. Yes, they went on a lot of trips, and yes, they were all paid for by Thrive. Shanann's dad, Frank, is the one that flew in to Colorado to stay with the girls on this trip. So it kind of seems to me like Sandra and Frank were kind of taking turns flying back and forth to Colorado to keep Bella and Cece for Shanann and Chris when they were away on these Thrive trips. Because Sandra had kept Bella and Cece on the last trip before this, and this time Frank flew in to keep them. And Frank says during this trip that he noticed that Chris had lost a lot of weight, and he was a lot more built and toned than he had ever been before. He also noticed that Chris was more aggressive and stern with Bella and Cece than he'd ever been before, which was weird just because Frank said that Chris was always pretty passive-aggressive and that he'd never seen him act like this with the girls or with Shanann before. Something just seemed different. It seemed off. Even though Chris went through this entire trip to San Diego playing the perfect husband, in reality, he was sending racy texts to his mistress, Nicole Kessinger. And it was actually during this trip that Chris finally added Nicole Kessinger to his contact list on his work phone, not his personal phone. Because Chris had to have known that he couldn't add Kessinger to his personal phone because Shanann used his personal phone all of the time to post about Thrive and sign people up through his social media accounts under his Thrive account. Kessinger eventually told Chris that he was going to have to start texting her from his personal phone so that no one at work would be able to see what they were talking about, because on their work phones, all of their calls, texts, and emails could be monitored through the company that they both worked for. So Chris did finally add her name to his personal phone, and her number was listed under PC Health Safety Environmental, because that's so romantic. Chris and Kessinger did actually work together, so why not just put her name in his phone as, her actual name? Either way, while the couple was in San Diego on this Thrive trip, Chris got to visit with his childhood best friend, Mark Jameson. And since the two lived so far away from each other, Mark was someone that Chris didn't get to see very often, but he still trusted Mark. They had been friends since they were kids. Chris says in a later interview that he actually told Mark about his mistress, and Shanann's friend and thriving buddy, Nicole Atkinson, who was also on this Thrive trip, said that Shanann and Chris were all over each other and seemed to be as happy as ever during this trip to San Diego. I guess that was until Chris decided to become a cheating skid mark. This trip was when Chris and Kessinger started planning on meeting up with each other when he got back from San Diego. Shanann had already had her bags packed and her things together for her and the girls to go to North Carolina for the summer before this trip to San Diego. Because as soon as Shanann and Chris got back from San Diego, Shanann, Bella, and Cece were supposed to head out to North Carolina to stay for the summer. Chris wasn't going to be able to join the family until the very last and 6th week of this trip to North Carolina because he has a regular job. And on June 26th, Shanann and Chris got back from their trip from San Diego. They landed in Denver, and the two headed home to be with their girls. They came home to a letter about their HOA. Their HOA was actually suing the couple for not paying their HOA fees. Chris and Shanann were getting sued for $1,533.80 plus court cost. So once Shanann and Chris had gotten back from their Thrive trip to San Diego, Chris drove Shanann's dad Frank, Shanann, Bella, and Cece to the airport, and they would all fly together to North Carolina for their 6-week-long trip. Like I mentioned before, the plan was for Chris to meet up with Shanann and the girls in North Carolina on the 6th week of this trip. Since Shanann worked from her phone, she was able to do her work from anywhere. But with all the Thrive trips that they had already taken, there was no way that Chris was going to be able to miss 6 whole weeks of work. So Chris would meet up with them in North Carolina at the end of July, and they would all come back after the 6th and final week of their visit. As soon as Chris got home from dropping his family off at the airport, he didn't waste any time. He and Kessinger made plans to meet up the very next afternoon after work. It didn't take a whole 24 hours for Shanann to leave before he was meeting up with his side piece. Chris and Kessinger had made plans to see a movie together after work, but when they got off to go to the theater was sold out of tickets for the movie that they wanted to see, so they decided to hang out at the nature preserve. This was the first time that Chris and Kessinger had been able to hang out outside of work. When Kessinger asked when him and Shanann had separated, he told her that they had both decided to split up in March and had still been living together in the same house, but that they hadn't slept in the same bed since they agreed to separate. That was a lie. Chris told her that the couple had decided to split because she had started belittling him in front of their kids, and the kids were starting to repeat what they heard their mom say. That Shanann was bossy and controlling, and that she worried about appearances on her social media more than she worried about their real life together. But Chris also told Kessinger that their marriage had been bad for the last 6 years, so that doesn't exactly seem to be truthful. Things seem to be really good for the most part of their marriage. After Chris and Kessinger sat on a bench and talked, they walked around the nature preserve, and they went back to Kessinger's house together. Chris's grimy ass brought 2 condoms with him on their very first quote-unquote date, but Kessinger did notice that one of the condoms that Chris had brought looked like it had been torn from a roll of condoms that had already been opened. Like an entire pack of condoms, and condoms aren't normally something that people need when they're sleeping separate from their spouses. And Kessinger had seemed to pick up on that also, because she asked about why it looked like one of the condoms had been torn from an entire roll. Chris told her that they were from when him and Shanann were still having sex, and that seemed to be the end of it. She's not a complete idiot because she did notice, though. Kessinger also asked Chris why he would use condoms with his wife, and he told her that Shanann just didn't like the mess. Chris and Kessinger did end up sleeping together on this quote-unquote first date, and the next night they slept together again at Kessinger's house after they met up at her place again once they got off of work. She texted him later on to let him know that she would be leaving town for a few days sometime soon, but that she would be back before her birthday on July 3rd. She texted Chris to tell him that they would still see each other when she got back, and then asked, quote, "You think you're the only one addicted right now? I'm so hooked on you." And Chris texted back about how sleeping without her beside him was gonna suck. Which, come on now, it's been 2 nights. It's not that serious. Which I guess it is because he killed his whole family, never mind. And then on June 30th, Chris texted Kessinger saying, quote, "I have an idea, by the way. I have a free hotel stay at the Holiday Inn. Not sure if you can swing it this month, but we can road trip to the mountains or southern Colorado for a day or 2 if you want." She texted back saying, quote, "Won't cost a dime, LOL." But then Kessinger texted Chris and asked what his wife would think about him taking a trip with his mistress, and he basically told her that he wasn't going to stop seeing her. She texted and asked if he thought that they were bad people for having this affair. Chris then told her that he craved her being in his life, so basically she was like a drug to him, and I hate to agree with this because I hate both of these humans, but I feel like anybody who's ever been in love or even in lust knows how the start of a relationship can feel like a high that you cannot explain. Like you want to be with them in every way and every second, and you connect with their soul. And it does feel addicting, so I get it. And on July 3rd, when Kessinger's birthday rolled around, Chris did show up at her house to celebrate her birthday with her. Chris brought her flowers and a homemade card that he had written in. And that would be really sweet if he wasn't giving this handwritten card to his mistress. He also wrote her a love letter that said stuff like, quote, "Big things will happen this year." And I've always wondered if this was a little bit of foreshadowing. Like maybe he had been planning these murders for a lot longer than he claimed. Or maybe this is one of those things that only seems eerie in hindsight, because hindsight is always 20/20. The next morning, Chris woke up in bed with Kessinger, but when he rolled over and looked at his phone, he had about a dozen missed calls from Shanann. And I honestly think that he had just completely forgotten about his wife and kids during these few days. Like, for real. I think he just forgot. Because remember, Shanann, Bella, and Cece are still in North Carolina for this 6-week summer visit. And when Chris went outside of Kessinger's house to call his wife back, Shanann hung up on him after she yelled, "Screw you," to him. Chris told her that he had missed all 12 or so of her calls because he had been asleep. He had been off of work that day, and he had planned on sleeping in. But when Chris went back inside of Kessinger's house, she was in the shower. And Chris had been so freaked out about Shanann arguing with him about missing his calls that Chris just kind of yelled into the bathroom and told Kessinger that he had to go. Kessinger later said that she and Chris were supposed to be spending that day together, and that Chris leaving abruptly kind of made her wonder if what they were doing was right. But obviously, Chris felt some type of way about missing all of Shanann's calls. Or he likely wouldn't have just dipped out on his highly addictive mistress. So Chris headed home and called Shanann and the girls in North Carolina. And immediately after hanging up with Shanann and the girls, he called Kessinger and invited her to his house. Yes, he had his Great Value brand mistress inside of the same house that he shared with his wife and kids. Supposedly, to hear Kessinger tell it, she only went to his house to help him with a work app, that Chris cooked lunch for the both of them, they ate, and she left. But this wasn't even the only time that she was inside the Watts family house, while Shanann and the girls were gone. And if you look at pictures of Kessinger and Shanann side by side, they look wildly similar. Kind of looks to me like Kessinger is the younger, less momish version of Shanann. But the two still look super similar to one another. Kessinger said that while she was inside of Chris and Shanann's house, that she saw pictures of Chris, Shanann, and the girls, and she told him that they were gorgeous, and that it was pretty hard for her to picture why Chris wouldn't want to fix things with his wife, even if only for their kids' sake. But according to Kessinger, when she asked Chris why he didn't want to work things out with his wife, he just told her that he was basically just done with it. And the always so thoughtful Chris made sure to give Kessinger a tour while she was inside the family home. He even took her into his basement to show her his in-home gym. He talked to her about Thrive and even told her she should try Thrive. She said she never understood how it worked, but she knew that she didn't feel comfortable with the way that Chris wore more than one Thrive patch at a time. That she was under the impression that you only needed one patch, and even though she knew very little of the products, she still thought it was weird that you would need to wear two. While Chris's family was gone to North Carolina for those 5 weeks before he joined them, Chris spent the night at Kessinger's house nearly every night, having sex with her and living his best bachelor life. Kessinger said that she even laid down some ground rules for their relationship to Chris. One of these rules were that Chris would always come to her house and that they would never go to his house. She even went so far as to call her house, quote-unquote, their place. But Kessinger broke her own rules by going to Chris's house more than once when his family was gone. Kessinger said that she told Chris that she wanted to take things slow until his divorce was finalized, the divorce that Shanann knew nothing about, and the divorce that also wasn't happening. But then later said that it was like Chris was in fifth gear the entire time that they were seeing each other. The next argument that Shanann and Chris had was while she was still in North Carolina with the girls on this 6-week trip. And this argument came when Shanann tried FaceTiming Chris a few times and he didn't answer any of those calls. Chris sent Shanann a text saying, quote, "I didn't see these FaceTimes and I'm sorry I missed those calls. I'm very, very, very sorry. The FaceTimes went through on my work phone." Shanann, obviously upset, just replied saying, quote-unquote, "forgot, quote-unquote, not getting my calls. You fucking call your kids when you wake up. You have not called one time since we've been here on your own." So she's pissed, and, I mean, honestly, I can see why. It's like they left and he just forgot that he had kids and a wife. Chris then tells Shanann that he feels like a jackass and that he would start FaceTiming the girls when he wakes up, and he ends this text with saying, "Please be okay." But it has to say something that Shanann had to basically tell him to call his kids when he wakes up because they weren't around each other. Shanann simply replies to this text from Chris telling him, quote, "You'd think you missed us, but guess not." Chris texts back saying, "I do miss you guys, I miss you tons," and the word tons was in all caps. According to Shanann, before her and the girls left for North Carolina, she and Chris were having sex upwards of 3 times a day, which, get it, girl. And for the first week or so that she and the kids were in North Carolina, that she and Chris were phone sexting it up. And then the calls got fewer and the texts got shorter and the phone sex stopped altogether. The excuses began to get worse and worse throughout the days, and Shanann had no way of knowing that while she was in North Carolina, dealing with his mom, that Chris was out on whole dates with his new mistress. And I'm no genius or anything, but I'd be willing to bet my very last dollar that it is a lot easier to date your mistress when your wife is literally across the country. So while Shanann and the girls were in North Carolina, they went to Cindy and Ronnie's house, Chris's parents. The plan was that Shanann and the kids would stay with Chris's parents for a week or so, and then they would go stay at Shanann's parents' house for a week or so. They'd go back to Chris's parents' house for a week or so, and so on and so forth. Cindy picked Shanann and the girls up on Friday, July 6, 2018. And before Shanann and the girls left Colorado to head to North Carolina, she made sure to send a list to not only her parents, but also to Chris's parents, of things that Cece could and couldn't have due to her nut allergy. Cindy and Ronnie had told Shanann that they had gotten rid of everything with nuts in it, which I think is awfully odd considering I've spent quite a few hours watching different videos of Shanann inside of her own house, and there's a jar of Jif peanut butter on the kitchen counter. So what would be the reason for his parents needing to throw all of the food away that contains nuts when she had products in her own house that contain nuts? Just keep the 2-year-old away from the nuts. It's that simple. So seems like a little bit of a double standard if you ask me. But then again, no one asked me. Even though Chris's parents had went and bought all the things that were approved by Shanann via the list that she sent to them, Shanann still went to the grocery store once they got there and spent an additional $375 just to get more CC-approved foods and snacks. Which to me kinda completely defeats the entire purpose of sending them a list of approved foods. Almost seems like she doesn't trust them with her kids' health, which is weird because they are their grandparents. Either way, that same night while Shanann and the girls were hanging out with Chris's parents, Ronnie and Cindy, Chris was busy on another date with Miss Kessinger. And even though Chris and Kessinger had been out on dates before, this was the date that Kessinger saw as their quote-unquote first date. And it was on this date when Chris broke down and told her that he thought he was in love with her. Which makes me wonder at this point if Chris hadn't already convinced himself that he would be willing to do anything to be with her, including murdering his entire family. Chris and Kessinger had the I'm in love with you talk, and she told him that they weren't going to be able to go any further with this relationship until his relationship and divorce was finalized with Shanann. Also adding to this, she said that she knew she wasn't ready to meet his kids. Keep in mind that Chris is the only one in this whole entire marriage who knew anything about a separation or divorce. But the statement that she makes about not being ready to meet his kids also makes me wonder if maybe she said something along the lines of not being ready to be in a relationship with somebody that already had kids. Because I do know at one point she told him that it didn't really matter what they did together. She felt like she was always going to be like second place to his wife and family. And that everything that they did together would kind of be like a been there, done that situation since he was already married with kids. So was this just another little push that he needed to get rid of them so that they could restart everything together, just those two? I don't know. Makes me wonder, though. But Saturday evening, back in North Carolina, Shanann had been trying to call Chris, and he just wasn't answering any of her calls. And oddly enough, he wasn't answering any of her calls because, ding, 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 you guessed it, he's on another hot date with Miss Kessinger at the Rusty Bucket restaurant, which also seems so romantic. Okay. Kessinger said that all the missed calls didn't seem to bother Chris, so it seems to me like she was aware that Shanann was blowing his phone up. But my thinking is like, what if something had happened to one of their kids? And both Chris and Kessinger knew that Chris was deliberately ignoring Shanann's calls. So weird yet again. And up until this point in their relationship, Chris had been paying for any dinners and other dates with Kessinger using gift cards that he got for different incentives through his job. And this basically ensured that Shanann wouldn't see any of the charges on their shared debit or credit card statements. Because it would be pretty hard to track gift cards that you don't know exist. Also, Kessinger swears that she thought that the two were separated and getting a divorce, so how does she justify Shanann calling back to back without it being that something may be wrong? It doesn't make sense. Either way, the next morning, Chris woke up in bed with Kessinger yet again and texted his wife Shanann. Chris apologized to Shanann and told her that he was sorry about missing all of her calls and that the heat at work and the stress of training a new coworker had him just exhausted. I'm sorry, no sir, you're exhausted from all the wild monkey sex you've been having with the Great Value brand Shanann. Not from work, but we'll continue. On Monday of that week, Chris's sister Jamie came over to she and Chris's parents' house to hang out with their parents and Shanann and to let their kids play with each other because their cousins didn't really get to see each other. They lived across the country. Jamie's son Dalton, who was 10, and her son Dylan, who was 7, spent the day playing with their cousins. But when 7-year-old Dylan went to the kitchen of his grandma's house to get a bowl of ice cream, all hell would soon break loose. All of the kids had a bowl of ice cream. It was pistachio-flavored ice cream, which is a nut. Shanann walked into her mother-in-law's kitchen, and Shanann and Chris's mom, Cindy, had a massive blowout of an argument about the ice cream that Chris's mom, Cindy, had bought. Cindy had given the kids a bowl of ice cream, and Shanann said that it not only had nuts in it, but it also had tree nut extract, and that it had been made in a factory with nuts. So, either way, Cece would be highly allergic to this ice cream if she was served it. Luckily, Shanann saw it and caught it just before 2-year-old Cece tried to eat it. And this small mistake would basically create a World War III type of incident. Shanann and Cindy got into an argument, and it was bad enough that Cindy actually asked Shanann to leave her house, which tells me that the argument had to be bad. Which, Cece's 2, she's not going to turn down ice cream, and she's also not old enough to realize how dangerous nuts could be to her. So, of course, taking ice cream from a 2-year-old is going to cause a baby meltdown for the books. Shanann saw this as her grandma, she should have known about the allergy, that she put her daughter in danger, especially since Shanann had taken the time to send them a list of nut-free foods that both girls could eat to make sure that Cece didn't feel left out. And naturally, Shanann wanted her husband to stand up for her during this fight with his mother. Shanann texted Chris saying, quote, "You better call your dad and tell him you don't appreciate your mom putting your daughter at risk today." Chris texted back saying, "I will call him and tell him what I think about this. It's not fucking cool at all because it's the kids. I will set this right." And this peanut ice cream incident is what Chris's parents would later commonly refer to as the Nutgate incident, or sometimes even Project Nutgate. And while in North Carolina still, Shanann and her parents had thrown Cece a birthday party. And even after the Nutgate incident, Shanann did still invite Chris's parents to this birthday party for Cece, but they just didn't come. Meanwhile, Shanann's Thrive partner and BFF, Nicole Atkinson, had texted Shanann while Shanann and the girls were still in North Carolina asking how Cece's birthday party had gone. Shanann simply replied with, quote, "Great, in-laws, no show." Sending another text to Nicole right after this saying, quote, "I don't ever want to see them again." So Shanann was pissed, and this one I do kind of understand. Meanwhile, back in Colorado, Chris and his mistress Kessinger went on yet another date while Shanann and the girls were still in North Carolina. The two went to the car museum on July 14th. And I will throw in the fact that Chris and Shanann had lived in Colorado for years now, and even though Chris was considered a master mechanic, he had still never been to this car museum before. But during this date to the car museum, Chris would ignore 4 more calls from Shanann, letting her go straight to voicemail. And from here, Chris and his Great Value brand Mistress went to parks, dinners, and he basically stopped answering Shanann's calls and just stopped responding to any of her texts almost altogether. Chris tells Shanann later that he's going to go hiking to quote-unquote clear his head, like he doesn't already have 0 responsibilities right now. His entire wife and 2 kids have been in North Carolina for weeks at this point. What could he possibly need to clear his head from? I don't know, maybe the empty house that he's living in. But okay, Chris, we'll go with this. Chris wouldn't be hiking by himself, though, because as you guessed it, on July 28th, Chris took Nicole Kessinger to the Sand Dunes National Park, and the two spent the night together camping, talking, and pretending that Chris didn't have a whole-ass wife and kids already. Chris even has pictures of Kessinger at their campsite, and he had the song Forever Girl inserted and playing in the background, which kinda makes me want to puke because are we still in middle school or no? Back in North Carolina, though, Shanann could feel that something was very, very much wrong within her marriage. She even asked Chris why he didn't want to talk to her anymore and why he had been acting so distant. Chris blamed work, and he laid on the honey, baby, boo, babe thing really thick, and he tells her he loves her. Chris made sure to reassure Shanann over and over again that the last few weeks that she and the girls had been gone to North Carolina, that he did miss them tremendously. And he had every excuse that you could think up as to why he had been so distant. Like most women do when something is bothering them, or if they start to get the sense that something's wrong with their relationship, Shanann texted her best friend, Nicole Atkinson, telling her that she wasn't sure what was going on, but that she could feel that something was off. Shanann even tells Nicole that she kind of just assumed that it was the argument that she had had with Chris's mom as to why he was so distant with her. The Nutgate incident. But she had no way of knowing about his mistress. Shanann also told Nicole that the only other time in their marriage that Chris had ever acted this strange was actually right before they had gotten married. And that was because his parents didn't really approve of her or their marriage, and that his mom never thought Shanann was good enough. And even though the two were barely speaking, when they were speaking at all, it was short and weird, Shanann still needed to portray her perfect life and marriage on her social media accounts because work goals, I guess. And Chris and Kessinger went on that overnight trip to hike and camp on July 28th and 9th. But then on the 31st, Chris was going to have to head to North Carolina to finally join his family. So he's going to have to remember how to be a husband and dad, and he needs to get on that remembering fast. And on July 31st, it was finally the day that Chris was flying into North Carolina to spend the last week of the summer with his wife and kids in North Carolina. Shanann texted Chris and tells him to let her know when he's coming down the escalator at the airport so that she can record the girls' reaction to seeing their dad since they hadn't seen Chris in 5 weeks. And in this video, the girls look super excited to finally see their dad after 5 weeks of not seeing him, and they just ran towards him, jumped into his arms, and he looks kind of excited to see the kids too. I mean, kinda. But he doesn't even so much as kiss Shanann on the forehead when the two greeted each other at the airport. This did not go unnoticed by Shanann at all. So let's stop here because there's a lot of back and forth on this last week in North Carolina when Shanann and Chris are together, and it gets real weird real fast after this. So next week we'll get into the last week in North Carolina, and then we'll get into Shanann, Bella, and Cece being reported missing. So I guess that's all for this week. Let's do it again. Same time, same place next Wednesday. See you then.
That's how my mama murdered a podcast.